of Industrial Agriculture by myself, Luca Gomez, Michael Erickson, David Funkhauser, and Enzo Robles. Introduction. Industrial agriculture is a form of modern farming that refers to the industrialized production of crops and animals, also animal products like eggs and milk. Industrial farming is what produces the foods that we eat today on a larger scale, allowing more people the ability to buy food. Here in this graph from the United Nations, we can see that in 1965, when the world population was at 3.3 billion, the cereal production was only at 1 billion. But in 2015, as the population grew to 7 billion, the global cereal production increased by 2 times. This is why industrial farming is favored over its counterpart, sustainable farming. Because sustainable farming is expensive, difficult to implement, not common, while industrial farming can be inexpensive, produces enough crop, and is easy to use. Our problem is that industrial farming is continuing to become more and more unsustainable. Neil Morgan from the National Library of Medicine states that the industrial system consumes fossil fuel, water, and topsoil at unsustainable rates. It contributes to numerous forms of environmental degradation, including air and water pollution, soil depletion, diminishing biodiversity, and fish die-offs. Industrial farming also uses large amounts of pesticides and harmful topsoils. In order to make industrial farming more sustainable, we need to start making changes.
Solution 1, changing fertilizer formulation. Given the current state of industrial agriculture, the rise in many different kinds of solutions, namely changing our soil formulation, has become a possible remediation that has already been put into effect. One such common reformulation of fertilizer is that of polymer-coated urea, or PCU. Now, what is PCU, as given here? Polymer-coated urea is an artificial plastic capsule that contains the nitrogen needed for vegetation and releases it over a long period of time. Due to this, it reduces excess nitrogen, thus minimizing the possible runoff into aquatic habitats. In effect, from an article written in the Journal of Plant Nutrition, author Nava Rajpandi, who is a researcher from the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center in Nepal, writes, multi-locational field trials for maize and rice were conducted across 9 districts in Nepal during 2018 and 2019 to assess the potential of polymer-coated urea and urea briquette to increase agronomic nitrogen use efficiency, crop productivity, and farm profits over conventional urea. Nitrogen rates applied in PCU and UV treatments were 22% to 50% lower than CU. In their solution, the efficiency of the use of nitrogen used in formulation in turn is the reduction of excess nitrogen lost due to inefficiency. The result of this study gave insight into the feasibility of PCU becoming a more household formulation in agriculture. While maintaining or increasing crop yields compared to CU, for rice, our results are consistent with previous studies. They reported similar rice grain yield with 20 to 30% less nitrogen fertilizer. Moreover, they find maize grain yield with the use of PCU applied at 20% less nitrogen compared with normal urea. Increased grain yield, despite the lower amount of fertilizer, is due to the continuous availability of nitrogen as PCU reduces nitrogen slowly. Such studies and others of the sort have helped give way to bringing PCU and other types of fertilizer formulations to light, though one such drawback is the economic cost. Polymer-coated urea can cost around 20 cents per pound more than regular urea, given by the University of Minnesota. This may seem like a nominal fee, though, when put into perspective, the mass amount of soil and fertilizer needed to man an industrial-sized piece of land becomes a very hefty cost for farmers. In addition to the high economic cost in bulk, they can have pollutants and or be toxic, i.e. polymer-coated urea, and mostly difficult to degrade with the potential environmental impacts as a major concern.
Solution 2. Proper government subsidizing. The government is currently sponsoring incorrect and unsustainable farming practices. An article written by David Imhoff points this out. Subsidies were formerly linked to conservation requirements like land set-asides and penalties for plowing grasslands and draining wetlands. Sadly, these subsidies have been dismantled to fund other farming methods. Incentivizing farmers to farm sustainably. How can we incentivize farmers to farm more costly and sustainably? Implementing this will take leadership, and when large companies see sustainable methods being sponsored, especially when small farmers are using sustainable methods and receiving government grants to fund their processes, large companies will likely change their methods to be more sustainable and receive government sponsorship. Advantages. An advantage to government subsidies is that if we can get the government to change their funding, we can not only fund sustainable practices, but also fund healthy food production. Another article from David Imhoff states that the government funds mostly meat production, which should only take up about half of our plates and is not sustainable and unhealthy. Limitations. A limitation to government grants is that it can be difficult to implement with today's corruption and political leaders. Lots of politicians put money towards the practices they want to sponsor, instead of the sustainable practices that we should be using today. Finally, tax increases would also be prevalent. The government increasing sponsors to small and more expensive sustainable practices will cost more money and therefore lead to tax raises, which will have a direct effect on consumer prices.
Best solution, government subsidies. We believe that between changing fertilizer formulation and government grants, the best solution to this problem is government subsidizing. This would mean that the federal government would give money to farms that produce food in a sustainable way that doesn't release pollutants into the environment. The higher cost of producing food sustainably would be countered by these subsidies, allowing farmers to still make a living. People would be able to buy food that they know is sustainably produced because the government provides an incentive to farmers to not harm the environment. Although we find government subsidies to be the best answer to our problem, some limitations include increased taxes and corruption, as already discussed earlier. Granting subsidies to sustainable farms doesn't necessarily mean an increase in taxes, it just means a decrease in the amount of money that gets put into other government programs such as healthcare and the military. We believe that these can survive with lower amounts of government funding being allocated towards them. Another problem that this solution runs into is corruption, but that exists in arguably every governmental program, and we believe that the risk of corruption is outweighed by the benefits of sustainable farming. To finish off, to make our food production less environmentally harmful, we want the government to allocate part of its budget to giving subsidies to sustainable farmers. These subsidies stand as incentives for farmers around the country to switch to more environmentally friendly, sustainable practices. We believe that taxes that provide these subsidies could be taken out of the budget for other departments, meaning that public taxes don't increase. We also believe that other risks such as corruption are minimal and worth their reward. Because of our solution, sustainable farming could become mainstream in the United States, keeping our people fed and our environment healthy. This is our